Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. What is the absolute smallest human population you'd need to repopulate Earth? I mean, we can theorize all day long about isolated space colonies on distant planets or, post-apocalyptic bunkers. But history actually gives us a perfect, honestly kind of terrifying case study right here. We're talking about the 30-person crew of a Viking longship battling the freezing North Atlantic. And this isn't just a story about ancient history. It's a literal masterclass in how small, isolated groups build meticulous systems to keep each other alive against totally impossible odds. So picture this. Imagine sitting just 3 feet above freezing, black water in a wooden boat that was deliberately built without a cabin. There's no door to close, there's no cozy below-deck area filled with hot cocoa. It's literally just cargo and ballast stones down there. The wind is constantly howling, the freezing sea spray is hitting you in the face. How in the world did anyone survive weeks out there? The stakes of this survival system are deeply, deeply personal, because every single drop of temperature lost was a literal step closer to death. But first, we gotta shatter this Hollywood myth immediately. The cinematic Viking, you know the one, bare-chested, wind blowing in his hair, completely immune to the freezing temperatures, is pure fiction. The historical reality was, well, a whole lot more grim. These people didn't have magical northern blood. They lost body heat by exactly the same biological rules that you and I do. In reality, they were wrapped in damp wool, shivering, and constantly bailing water out of an open boat. They survived not through brute toughness, but through meticulous organization and incredibly disciplined systems. Which brings us to Section 1, layering and the wool margin, their very first line of defense. Because a longship's open hull prioritized speed and function over shelter, a Viking's clothing wasn't just an accessory. Their clothing was their actual home. But you've probably heard that old outdoor myth, right? Wool keeps you warm even when wet. Well, that is a wildly dangerous oversimplification. It's true that wool's naturally crimped fibers trap insulating air pockets way better than flat plant fibers do, but it certainly doesn't become magically warm when it gets completely soaked. Fully saturated wool is heavy, the wind rips right through it, and a sailor sitting in soaking wet wool can absolutely still die of exposure. What wool actually gave them wasn't invincibility, it gave them a margin, basically a slightly longer window to fix the problem before the cold became fatal. And that tiny margin was managed through a very strict layering system. First, you'd have linen against the skin, if they could get it. Second, multiple wool tunics and leg wrappings. And finally, a dense, tightly woven outer wool cloak. The genius here isn't just throwing on one giant, thick coat. Several thin layers trap significantly more air than one thick garment. It also meant that sailors could constantly adjust their insulation. They could easily open a cloak when they were working hard and sweating and tie it tight the exact second the wind picked up. Of course, in extreme cold, your body naturally sacrifices blood flow to your extremities just to protect your vital organs. So to keep their fingers and toes functional, the Norse relied on something called null-binding. This is a single needle looping technique, totally distinct from modern knitting, that creates incredibly dense, flexible, and warm mittens and socks. Because having wet feet was a constant, grinding problem on a boat taking on water, having dry, null-bound socks to change into was quite literally the only thing keeping a sailor's toes attached to their feet. No joke. Moving on to Section 2, the human heating system, turning the body into a biological engine. Here's the thing. Clothes only trap heat. They don't actually make it. The crew had to rely on their own bodies to turn the ship into an engine. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the timeline of the sweat cycle. See, rowing incredibly hard generates massive body heat, but when the watch ends at hour 2, the rowing stops. Suddenly, that sailor isn't generating heat anymore. By hour 2.2, all that sweat they worked up has totally dampened their inner wool layers, and the freezing ocean wind turns that moisture into a fatal windshield disaster. Trying too hard and sweating wasn't a sign of being a hard worker. It was a medical emergency waiting to happen. Managing exactly when heat and cold swapped places was a constant, terrifying battle. So how do you manage that? Well, they used the Viking watch system. Splitting the crew prevented everyone from burning through their energy and heat at the exact same time. It's brilliant. The active watch worked the oars and sails, generating that crucial heat. The resting watch performed low-exertion tasks, like eating or bailing water. And the off-duty crew did the absolute most important job of all. They slept and huddled together to share body heat. Scheduling wasn't just for efficiency, it was used as a literal survival tool. And let's just be brutally honest about what that off-duty shift actually looked like. The greatest heater on the entire ship was just 30 unwashed men wrapped in damp sheep hair, smelling absolutely terrible, but keeping each other alive. Huddling together under drywall blankets reduced their exposed surface area and created this warmer microclimate that one single person just couldn't replicate on their own. It was deeply unglamorous, it was undoubtedly miserable, but hey, it worked. All right, Section 3, fuel, fire, and land. Keeping those metabolic engines running. So what kind of metabolic fuel do you need to keep 30 freezing bodies generating heat without just failing? Check out their ideal sea diet broken down by energy density. Notice that massive 60% slice? That's entirely dedicated to high-fat foods like butter and preserved fatty meat. An exhausted, shivering body burns through calories at a terrifying rate. This food wasn't chosen for its culinary flavor, guys. It was chosen for blunt, raw, caloric fuel. Fat contains more energy per gram than protein or carbs, making it the perfect fuel for those internal furnaces. Running out of food at sea wasn't a problem you just figured out later. It meant your internal heater shut down completely. And while we're on the topic of consumption, we desperately need to debunk the whole trope of the drunken sailor. The alcohol myth is deadly. Drinking strong alcohol widens the blood vessels near your skin. This actually tricks your brain into feeling this brief, nice sensation of warmth. But what's really happening? Your body is dumping your precious core heat directly into the freezing wind. While a little weak ale provided hydration and a few much-needed calories, strong alcohol would have actively destroyed their ability to retain life-saving warmth. Now, the intense need for heat often brings up the myth of shipboard cooking. But open sea cooking on a highly flammable wooden longship with hot coals rolling around in rough waves, that is a deadly risk that nobody sane volunteers for. The true strategy for getting warm actually relied on the ship's incredible design, specifically its shallow draft. This design allowed the crew to basically drive the ship right up onto a beach. Beaching meant safe fires, the ability to carefully dry out those expensive wool layers, and the chance to actually eat warm food without burning the boat down. And this opportunism extended right into how they used shelter. If they were underway in a bad storm, they rigged no shelter at all. Think about it. A tent would just catch the wind and turn into a highly dangerous sail. Their only focus was vessel control. If they were anchored in calm water, yeah, they might rig a canvas or wool canopy over the deck. But the absolute best option was always beaching the ship and pitching tents on solid land. Shelter was never ever trusted mid-storm. It was a luxury they used only when the ocean permitted. That brings us to Section 4, knowing when not to sail and the power of cultural wisdom. This final layer of their survival system was entirely mental. So the crucial point is understanding survivorship bias. We have a heavily skewed view of history because we only ever hear the dramatic accounts of the ships that actually made it to the other side. The ships caught by sudden squalls that simply vanished into the dark, they don't leave journals. Cold water immersion kills incredibly fast, and once a sailor went into the sea, those heavy wool layers made swimming almost impossible. The journey seems safer to us now only because the failures were permanently erased by the sea. To avoid becoming a victim of that survivorship bias, Vikings relied on accumulated generations of knowledge. They actively planned their longest voyages around the favorable summer season and completely avoided the dangerous winter, which brought shorter daylight, violent storms, and deadly sea ice. They highly preferred island-hopping routes over vast stretches of open ocean. They constantly read environmental indicators, like clear skies and bird behavior, to predict the weather before they ever left shore. Because of this deep, generational knowledge, the absolute most effective piece of cold weather gear wasn't an item on the ship at all. It was the experienced voice of a captain, reading the clouds, looking at the waves, and stating calmly, "We are not leaving today." That cultural technology, passed down through stories and hard practice, was the ultimate lifesaver. Refusing to set sail into a storm was the true peak of Viking seamanship. Let's pull back the curtain a bit and see how this builds into an even larger picture. The survival of those 30 men started months before they ever touched the water. It relied on a massive, almost invisible community effort. Raising and shearing sheep, thousands upon thousands of hours of spinning and weaving by textile workers back home, the immense, tedious labor of preserving meat and drying fish, the generational passing down of safe navigational routes. Look, no wool, no voyage. That dramatic journey rested entirely on the quiet, structured labor of the community they left behind. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate truth of their situation. True survival did not look like one fearless, solitary hero staring off into the horizon. It looked like 30 exhausted people sharing their labor, following disciplined systems, and quietly keeping one another alive, one freezing watch at a time. It was a massive collective triumph of negotiation with a ridiculously hostile climate. Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. If simply surviving a voyage required this staggering amount of layered preparation, community labor, and rigid discipline, how much of our own daily comfort today relies on hidden systems that we take completely for granted? Next time you seamlessly turn up the thermostat or slip on a lightweight synthetic jacket, remember the Longship. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.